after that kind of setup. Or no, sorry, Xavier. Okay, so in this position, I'm going to have you lay all the way flat. So to test for glute max and hamstrings, we keep the lower extremities straight and instruct the patient to lift. I'm going to just come to the other side, just so you guys can see. I would typically be doing this testing on the same side. Scooch just a little closer to me, though, if you don't mind. Okay, so you're going to be similar to when we tested for hip extension range of motion. We want to make sure that the pelvis is staying level. So I'm going to just put my hand on her pelvis to stabilize, and then ask her to try lifting her leg up towards the ceiling. Perfect, and then come on down. Good. So she does a really nice job. She's not compensating with her lumbar spine. If you were to see them kind of try to hitch their leg up using their spine, that would be a compensation. And you could try first to cue them, say not from your back, try lifting from your glute. So go ahead and lift up all the way from my glute. Good. And then for your resistance, go ahead and relax. You're going to apply the resistance on the distal part of the calf. So come on up as far as you can. Good. You can bring them slightly down from their end range and then apply your resistance here into flexion. Nice. And then relax. Okay, so again, this tests for both hamstring and glute max. So we're not biasing one or the other. It's a group test for both. If we wanted to bias the glute max, we need to flex the knee to 90 degrees. So why do you guys, can anybody kind of theorize why we would flex the knee to 90 and test hip extension this way so that we're getting more glute max versus testing hamstrings? Can one person say?
Shortening the hamstrings.
Yes, yes. So this is an example of active insufficiency, right? So we're putting the hamstrings in a shortened position. So we're asking her to extend the hip, which shortens the hamstrings, and she's flexed at the knee, which is also a hamstring contraction. So because she's flexed over both of those joints in the hamstring, they're going to be much less able to generate force, and so we're going to be biasing more the glute max. Okay, so that's an example of active insufficiency in order to make sure that we're biasing the glute max. So in this case, it's a good thing because we're getting more specific at what muscle we're testing. Does that make sense? Yeah. So, same stabilization of the pelvis. Go ahead and try lifting your heel towards the ceiling. Good. So I see that glute max contracting, and hold that position. Don't let me move you. Hold. Good. She's really strong. This is typically a very, very challenging manual muscle test to hold. So that was great. And for your gravity minimized position, you're going to be in side lying. So same thing as hip flexion. So you take her into side lying. Again, now you're not asking her to lift the weight of the limb, and you're taking gravity out of the picture. So she's in that horizontal plane. Go ahead and relax. So for this one, there's no bias between glute max and hamstring. It's the same. It's just testing hip extension in the gravity minimized plane. So you're going to be doing, this would be for both hamstring or glute max. And then asking her to try to bring her leg back behind. And I'm just, again, holding her leg. I'm not helping her at all. She's just trying to do that movement. Yeah. And I can feel both her hamstring and her glutes are kicking on. If she were not to be able to do a movement at all in gravity minimized, you'd actually put her prone to check for grades 0 and 1. So if you go back prone, and then you actually just ask her to try to lift her leg, and you see if you get a contraction of glute max. So there would be no movement. It would almost just be like trying to squeeze your glutes together. Go ahead and just try squeezing your glutes. Yeah. There we go. So if you saw that, she'd get a 1. And then if you saw nothing, it'd be a 0. Okay, so that's hip extension, both glute max bias and hamstring and glute max. And then let's test my favorite, hip abduction. This is my favorite manual muscle test because it's dysfunctional in so many people in the clinic. So, so in particular, like for example, I see a lot of patients who have pelvic floor dysfunction, and so I find that a lot of a lot of women have spasms in their obturator internus, which is a deep pelvic floor muscle that causes pelvic pain. And a lot of times in those patients, it comes from glute medius weakness. So because their glute medius has been chronically weak for a very long time, their obturator internus has been working overtime, and that causes it to go into spasm, which can cause pelvic pain. So that's why I love this test so much, because it's a very common part of weakness, especially in your hip and lower back patients. So I use this all the time to measure for strength and track progress as we, start interventions and give strengthening exercises. I mean, we just did it with Kareem. He's like, he found the weakness, did strengthening, and then we retest, and it's really rewarding for patients to see that, like, oh yeah, like I remember I was so weak before, and now we did all these exercises, and you get stronger. I'm not saying you were so weak, but I'm just saying in the clinic it can be a very rewarding and an empowering thing for patients to see that objective change. So for hip abduction, make sure the pelvis is slightly rolled forwards, because if she's rolled back and I come up into abduction, she's going to be really using her TFL more than her glutes. So pelvis is rolled forwards, upper extremity is straight, in slight hip extension in abduction with the knee facing straight out. So I'm just kind of monitoring her pelvic position here and asking her to hold it first. Make sure to palpate the glute med here, because again, a lot of people can be very tricky, and they might just be using their TFL and kind of migrate forward like this. And then you're not really testing their glute. So you want to keep them in that position and make sure that they're holding it. And then let them relax so that they're not fatigued when you actually do the resistance. And then let's go ahead and come back up and back into it. Good, roll your pelvis forward a little bit more. Yeah, there we go. So again, see how it's really easy to get that pelvis to tilt back. And then hold here. Resistance is on the calf, and then you're pressing straight down into adduction. Ooh, nice. Good, relax. Very strong. Okay, and then for gravity minimized for this, you'd be laying supine, and you can either support the limb to minimize friction. You could put a towel under here to minimize the friction as well, but even just kind of providing your support of the limb and asking them to bring it out to the side into adduction. Yeah, and she can go through a full available range. She gets the 2. If it's only partial range, 2 minus, and then you'd palpate her glute med and ask her to try to bring her leg out to palpate for a muscle contraction. Yeah. Okay. So let's try the 2 hip